Welcome to Innovating Clinical Trials, the podcast designed for clinical research professionals eager to deepen their understanding of clinical trials through concise, insightful segments. Join your hosts, Liam Eves and Ted Traffer, as they uncover the core issues in clinical research, reflect on the industry, and challenge conventional wisdom.
On today's episode, we're joined by Scott Burgher, Director of Patient Operations at Quest Diagnostics, bringing over 20 years of patient recruitment experience spanning healthcare marketing, clinical trial agencies, large consulting, and big tech. In this episode, Scott breaks down why recruitment keeps missing the mark. We discuss sponsor decision-making cycles that quietly stall recruitment, the opportunity for tech to ID candidates, and the need for more physicians to know and understand about clinical trials happening locally.
Ted, how are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great today, Liam. It's a beautiful, sunny, warm day, so excited for today and excited for our guest today and looking forward to just really dive into things.
Oh, so am I. I've known Scott for a little bit now, and I have a lot of fun chatting with him, so I'm sure there's going to be a huge amount of value for us and for other listeners. Scott, thank you so much for coming on and having a chat with us.
Hey guys, thank you very much for having me. Truly appreciate it.
No, it's absolutely. I think we feel very lucky to have a conversation. Before we kick things off, Scott, would you mind just perhaps giving a bit of an overview of yourself and your history, and how I'm assuming you fell into research?
Yeah, I've been doing what I would call patient acquisition work for about 20 years, maybe more. I don't like saying that. So I always say almost 20 years. And I started in, I guess it would be patient recruitment, but in the healthcare space. So I was working in marketing and communications, and my clients were hospital systems, rehab centers, really thinking through what the patient journey is and how to get the right patients into the right facilities. And from a U.S. perspective, usually really is dependent on the payer source and how they're going to afford to stay there, which is a real shame, not what's best for their actual care. So I did that for a bunch of years on the marketing side, and I was living out on the East Coast then. And eventually I convinced my wife to move to Chicago, which is where I'm from. And I found a job at a small agency called Continuum Clinical. And they were part of a larger marketing company called Blue Chip Worldwide. And so they did not consider themselves a product company, but they really focused on patient recruitment for clinical trials. In my naive mind, I believed, patient recruitment for pharmaceuticals and clinical is probably exactly the same as healthcare. And so I sold myself in the interview process, and I learned very quickly, I have no clue what clinical trials are or what patient recruitment was. And in order to maintain my job and feed my family, I had to fake it till I make it, which I'm probably still doing today. But, I learned really quickly the differences, but also the similarities and what I could leverage in terms of understanding patient journeys, understanding communication, aperture. When is the best time to reach out to these patients? Who are their influencers? Who's helping them make decisions? And how do you educate them appropriately so they have the right information and tools to make an informed decision about their health journey? And really started really just loving what I do. I'm feeling really passionate about patients, making sure that they have all their options ahead of them, whether that is, something that is already approved and in market, or if their best care option is a clinical trial and hopefully getting them the easiest path forward to get on that trial. And so I've always looked at patient recruitment from that regard. From Continuum Clinical, I then moved on to really large consulting. I was at Accenture for a couple of years, really focused on both patient recruitment, and then a little blip in the human universe happened. It's called COVID. And focus really shifted to decentralized clinical trials. So how do we still bring those trials to the patients, but bring it to them at home and obviously decentralize away from the site to try to keep people as safe as possible. And then surprisingly, my role shifted back to re-centralizing clinical trials and how do you bring trials back to the site? And so did that for a few years in large consulting. I then went over to a Alphabet Google company called Verily, where I led patient recruitment for them. That was exciting. And I've always dealt with technology and utilizing tech for recruitment, for engagement, for retention, for site engagement as well. And so this just took a different spin on that from more of the tech perspective and product perspective, and really gave me that background. And from there, I eventually moved on, and now I'm leading up patient recruitment at a company called Quest Diagnostics. Also a unique experience where historically I've always approached it from how do we find patients and then get them into the trial? And Quest is a little bit different because they've got just a treasure trove of patient data. And so identifying the patients is actually the easier part. We know them. We have a high level of confidence that they'll qualify for a trial just based on their labs and other potential third-party data. And then our job is really how do we bring them into the trial, and working obviously with other recruitment partners and sponsors and CROs to do that. And that brings me to today where I'm talking to you guys.
Well, welcome.
Yeah, welcome. It's I mean, it's fascinating. I love your point around the decentralized to then re-centralized. I think that is it's interesting, is it how things, we get these like micro innovations that then seem to slow up for probably the right reasons, to be quite honest. I mean, Scott, you've obviously got such a broad and honestly quite varied within the recruitment space background. I want to start off with like quite a broad question, which then we can sort of dive into, which is, what do you think is the state of patient recruitment at the minute? Like the good, the bad, the ugly. Like, where do you see things that are improving or things that are still broken? And what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. So it's a great question. So I'll start off with some positive. I think COVID actually did the industry a nice little gift in terms of just overall awareness. I've worked in this industry a long time. I used to say I work in clinical trials, and people would say, "Oh, so you're selling drugs?" And people really don't understand the clinical side of the business. They think everyone is on the commercial side. They don't understand the economics and everything behind that. And so I think if you're really talking about a clinical trial, people have more awareness. They know that trials exist, but there still is a bigger issue there in terms of how do we get them into the trial? And so the awareness is there, but perhaps we're celebrating the wrong metric on that one. And obviously we still need to get them into the trial. And so, going from the good, the bad, and maybe this is part of the ugly as well, but trials are still missing their enrollment deadlines. And so again, that awareness is great, but that's only step one. I've seen on 1,000 presentations, whether they're at different conferences or even my own presentations, I probably added this in, 86% of trials miss their enrollment deadline. I think I've seen that for over a decade. I could probably quote 4 different presentations that I wrote with that number if you're looking for where that number came from. And so I think we have to think about, is this something that, we as a community are looking to fix? There's always the new shiny toy. Today it's AI. That's the greatest buzzword in, I think, the whole industry, but for sure patient recruitment. And so we always say this is going to fix that enrollment deadline. And honestly, I'd love to say it will. I think we've got, as an industry, a lot of great ideas on how to utilize AI. I'm sure we'll get to some of those today, but I just want to make sure that we as an industry are focused on the right things. And what I've seen is a lot of sponsors are okay with missing that deadline, and they start planning against it. We know what we know. We're afraid to take risks. We're afraid to try new things. We're afraid to spend money on things we don't know the outcome. we know the outcome of patient recruitment is going to be delayed. We're going to miss deadlines. It's going to cost us money, but we're going to build that into our timelines and our budgets. And so that risk aversion is almost planned within their entire program. And to me, that just is not, it's not very forward thinking.
I mean, it's fascinating what you say, because I think that there is definitely a cultural element to this, right? Is that, like you say, there's almost an expectation that things will go awry. And like, I've often found this sort of trade-off between how much you're willing to put up front to get the right strategy in place, to get the right, mechanisms for not only just finding the patients, but like actually processing them as well to get them through. Because when I was looking at a couple of budgets across a few different organizations over the last couple of months, and I'm looking at what is qualified as recruitment, and the site costs that are around recruitment. But then there's like, well, okay, where is that centralized strategy? Where is that the cost for the processing, the cost for the things that you don't typically see, like underneath the iceberg, right, or underneath the waterline, which is a big chunk of it for recruitment. Just only last week, I was working with an organization, and they're like, okay, we don't have any more patients. And you start to look through the patients that they've got, and you're like, well, wait a minute, you've got loads of patients. They're just stuck somewhere that need to be unlocked. And like, so I guess my question is like, have you ever seen that done like really well, Scott, where you like, and like, what has been the difference where organizations are willing to invest in those areas, as you say, without perhaps knowing the full impact of what it will be, what it will do, but knowing that actually investing something and having a bit of a plan is probably more beneficial than not?
Yeah, you asked the question of if I've ever seen it. I've seen bits and pieces work here and there. This isn't novel. Anything that I'm going to say ultimately comes back to the earlier you start, the better chances you get. And so I think at the core, sponsored decision-making cycles are like massively underestimated as a blocker, right? And so you could build a phenomenal recruitment strategy, and in principle, it's approved by the study team, but then it sits in legal, it's in compliance, procurement hasn't even gotten eyes on it, 3, 4, 5, 6 months pass, and not a single patient has been outreached to, but your recruitment timeline has started, right? And so now you're just going to default back to, okay, let's put some digital ads out and some social media ads, and
Right.
let's cast a wide net. And nobody wants to talk about this because it implicates the client essentially. And so there's something broken earlier on in the process. Right. Where everyone's trying to do things in the moment that they need it, not recognizing that either we have to fix the process within the sponsor decision-making, or we have to start much sooner to get that approval for when we actually need to execute on it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I was thinking as you were talking that one of the challenges that we have when it comes to recruitment in clinical trials is that I don't think we've fully understand or defined the actual problem. I think the problem is not a problem. It is a multitude of challenges when it comes to patient recruitment. And yet our potential fixes are just looking at one small segment of the problem at a time. So, yeah, I don't know if you mentioned, at the last minute throwing more advertising at it. If we were to step back and look at this much earlier on, what would that look like from your perspective? But what kinds of things are we actually looking to get approved earlier on in the process? If you can give us some specifics of some of the items, the technology or tools.
I think that if I'm going to think about what are some of those items that we want to get that approval on earlier, or what are some of those strategies? So obviously one is thinking about the patient identification aspect, And so, if we're using AI now, and we've got companies and we've got data, whether it's prescription data, EHR, their medical records, if it's lab data, how do we mine that data appropriately to qualify those patients? And then how are we reaching out to them in a trusted way that they don't think that their data has been sold or compromised? And so to me, that's something where you really got to think through not only what is the right data you're looking for, and obviously that's going to be highly dependent on the IE criteria within the protocol, as well as what's available and out there based on that demographic of the patient that you're looking for. But then also, what are the mechanisms in terms of communicating with them? The other area that I would say is truly important is, and this might be, I don't know if it'll be frowned upon, and Ted, maybe you've got a good perspective. I think you've got a lot of site experience, but a number I won't be able to tell you where it came from, but I've seen 1,000 times. 81% of patients say that they would join a trial if their doctor recommended it. The other number on the flip side of that is only 20% of patients say that their doctors have ever recommended patient recruitment. And so I think that there is a tremendous patient access problem here, but directly related to the site. And I'm not blaming the site. The sites are not set up. Not necessarily the site, sorry, the physicians, the doctors, they're not educated appropriately. They don't know about clinical trials. And even if they did, they don't want to necessarily recommend something that they don't know if it's right for their patient. And so if a doctor is not properly educated, if they don't feel that they understand the mechanism of action, if they don't understand what the purpose of the trials are or what the endpoints are, they don't want to say, hey, patient, join this trial. And then the first question the patient asks, they can't respond to it. And so there's something there that's lacking in terms of why are clinical trials not viewed as part of a care option, just as any other prescription, over-the-counter, whatever therapy or drug is that a doctor is already recommending. And so how do we educate doctors to consider clinical trials as a care option, as something that they're recommending if it's the right thing for that patient and not as the last resort? And so there's the technology side from identifying the right patients, but then there's also the physician side of understanding now that that patient's identified, they do qualify, this trial could be the best care option for this patient. I want to recommend it. And so I think the AI and patient identification into that journey for the HCP to be educated enough to feel comfortable to recommend it as a care option is really where I'd love to shape the industry and take it to the next level.
Yeah, I think there's lots of challenges at the primary healthcare provider situation where a lot of times it's just easier to write a script and quicker to interact with that patient and then move on to the next patient. And sometimes it just simply becomes a time issue where a clinical trial and referring for a clinical trial and answering questions actually just takes too long. So how do we speed that up? How do we make it easier for them? How do we give everything that they need at their fingertips so that it is really straightforward for them and easy to do? I don't think we'll ever get it to the point where it's quite as easy as them just writing a prescription, but can we improve on it? Absolutely. Thanks for listening to part 1 of our series with Scott Burgher. Catch part 2 next, where we dig deeper into what's really blocking recruitment. If you have questions about the episode, contact us through our website at innovatingclinicaltrials.com. Follow Innovating Clinical Trials Podcast on LinkedIn and on your favorite streaming service. While you're there, give us a like. The Innovating Clinical Trials Podcast is hosted by Liam Eves and Ted Trafford and is produced by Tarini Chakurthi. Opinions expressed are those of the participants and not their respective employers.